The 5-year-old boy with dark curls and eyes like storm clouds reached up with trembling fingers to touch the waitress's tear-stained cheek. In the golden light of the upscale Beverly Hills restaurant, the moment felt suspended in time, a child's innocent gesture that would shatter every wall around 3 broken hearts. "Please don't cry," Asher Vega whispered, his small palm warm against Ivy Martinez's face as she knelt before him in her black uniform. "I just want someone to love me like other kids' mummies do." Behind them, Orion Rio Vega stood frozen, his expensive black suit and partially unbuttoned white shirt, doing nothing to hide the vulnerability that crashed through his carefully constructed facade. The intricate tattoo on his neck, a reminder of the dangerous world he commanded, seemed to pulse with his racing heartbeat as he watched his son's desperate plea unfold. This wasn't supposed to happen. Rio had built an empire on control, on keeping emotions buried and weaknesses hidden. But watching this struggling waitress's face crumble with maternal instinct as his son touched her cheek, he realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly what your heart demanded. Everything was about to change. Ivy Martinez had perfected the art of invisibility. In her black waitress uniform, fitted skirt, crisp blouse, small apron tied at her waist, she moved through Stellar like a shadow, serving Los Angeles's elite while remaining completely unnoticed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, a few loose strands framing her face, and her movements were efficient and graceful despite the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones. 11 hours into her double shift, her feet ached in the required black heels, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Every table, every tip, every smile brought her closer to her dream of UCLA medical school. At 24, she'd already sacrificed more than most people twice her age, working 3 jobs to keep her head above water in a city that devoured dreams for breakfast. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of power, tech moguls discussing acquisitions over wine that cost more than Ivy's monthly rent, Hollywood producers making deals that would shape careers, and men whose business cards never quite explained their wealth, but whose presence commanded immediate respect. Table 12 fell into that last category. Orion Rio Vega occupied the corner booth like a king holding court, though he dined alone as always. At 32, he was devastatingly handsome, in a way that made smart women stupid and dangerous men careful. His black suit was clearly custom-tailored, molding to broad shoulders and a lean, muscular frame. The white dress shirt beneath was unbuttoned just enough to reveal the edge of an intricate tattoo that curved along his neck, dark ink that spoke of secrets and stories Ivy couldn't begin to imagine. His dark hair was styled back from a face that belonged on magazine covers, all sharp angles and intense eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. When he moved, it was with the fluid confidence of a predator who had never been prey, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that made people listen without question. Ivy had been serving him twice a week for 3 months, and he still made her nervous in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. "Your check, Mr. Vega," she said quietly, approaching his table with practiced caution. Those storm-dark eyes lifted from his phone, and for a moment that felt like eternity, they locked with hers. Ivy felt her breath catch, her pulse quickening under his intense scrutiny. There was something almost predatory in the way he looked at her, but also something else, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even interest. "Thank you, Ivy," he said, and the way her name sounded in his deep voice made her stomach flutter traitorously. He knew her name. In 3 months of serving him, she'd never told him her name, which meant he'd made it his business to find out. The thought should have been alarming, but instead it sent a dangerous thrill through her system. "You work doubles every Tuesday and Friday," Rio continued, his voice conversational, but his eyes never leaving her face. "And weekends at the diner on Sunset Boulevard?" Ivy's heart rate spiked. "How do you—" "I notice things," Rio said simply, leaning back in his seat. The movement caused his shirt to pull slightly, revealing more of the tattoo that decorated his throat. Intricate lines that looked like they might be part of something larger, something that disappeared beneath his collar. "You're saving for something important." It wasn't a question, but Ivy found herself answering anyway. "Medical school, UCLA. Something shifted in Rio's expression. Surprise, definitely, and what might have been respect. Ambitious. Necessary, Ivy corrected, then immediately wondered why she was being so honest with him. Before Rio could respond, a commotion near the restaurant's entrance drew their attention. A small boy with dark curls and eyes identical to Rio's had somehow slipped past the hostess and was scanning the dining room with determined focus. When his gaze landed on Rio, his entire face transformed with joy. "Daddy!" The change in Rio was instantaneous and breathtaking. The dangerous edge softened, the predatory stillness replaced by something warm and achingly tender. He stood in one fluid motion, his expensive suit doing nothing to diminish the raw emotion that crossed his features as his son ran toward him. "Asher," Rio said, catching the boy in his arms and lifting him effortlessly. "What are you doing here, buddy? Where's Mrs. Chen?" "She's waiting in the car," Asher said, his small hands clutching Rio's shirt. "But I had to see you right now because tomorrow is the Mother's Day breakfast at school, and I need to ask you something super important." Ivy watched, transfixed, as Rio's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The vulnerability that flashed across his face was there and gone in an instant, but she caught it, the pain of a father who couldn't give his child everything he needed. "We talked about this, Asher," Rio said gently, his voice softer than Ivy had ever heard it. "Remember? You're going to spend the morning with Mrs. Chen, and we'll do something special afterward." "But all the other kids will have their mommies there," Asher said, his voice small but determined. "Tommy's mommy makes the best cookies, and Sarah's mommy always braids her hair pretty, and even Weird Kevin has his mommy. I'm the only one who doesn't have a mommy at all." Ivy felt her heart crack open. She should leave, give them privacy for this intimate moment, but something kept her rooted in place. Maybe it was the raw pain in Rio's eyes, or the way Asher's small voice carried such mature understanding of his loss. "Your mother," Rio started, then stopped, clearly struggling with words that had no good ending. "I know she went away because she was scared of your work," Asher said matter-of-factly, displaying the kind of brutal honesty that only children possessed. "Mrs. Chen explained it to me, but I thought maybe I could borrow someone just for one day." That's when Asher's eyes found Ivy. She was still standing there, frozen with Rio's check in her hands, watching this private moment unfold. The little boy studied her with the intense focus that children used when making important decisions, taking in her kind eyes, her gentle expression, the way she'd been listening to their conversation with obvious concern rather than curiosity. And then he asked the question that would change everything. "Can you be my mum for a day?" The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, silverware paused halfway to mouths, and even the ambient music seemed to fade into silence. Rio's eyes snapped to Ivy's face, and she saw shock, panic, and something else, something that looked dangerously like hope, flicker across his features. Ivy looked down at Asher's hopeful face, then up at Rio's carefully controlled expression. She thought about her own childhood, about the mother who'd worked herself to exhaustion to provide for them, about the loneliness she'd seen in too many children's eyes during her years of babysitting to pay for textbooks. This was insane. She was a waitress from East LA. He was clearly something far more dangerous and powerful than a simple businessman. And his son was asking her to step into a world she knew nothing about. But Asher was still looking at her with those enormous dark eyes, so much like his father's, and her heart was making decisions her brain couldn't stop. "What time does the breakfast start?" she heard herself ask. The smile that spread across Asher's face was like sunrise after the longest night, and when Ivy glanced at Rio, she saw something in his expression that made her pulse race for entirely different reasons. She'd just said yes to changing 3 lives forever, and she didn't even know it yet. Rio Vega had built his empire on reading people, their tells, their weaknesses, their hidden agendas. In his world, the ability to see through facades meant the difference between life and death, power and vulnerability. But as he watched Ivy Martinez kneel down to Asher's eye level, her black skirt pooling around her as she balanced gracefully on her heels, he found himself completely unable to read her motivations. "Tell me about your school," Ivy said softly, her voice carrying genuine interest as she looked into Asher's eyes. "What's your favorite thing about it?" We have a playground with swings that go really high, Asher said eagerly, his small hands gesturing excitedly. And my teacher, Miss Sarah, has a fish tank with colorful fish, and we get to feed them sometimes. Do you like fish? I love fish, Ivy said, smiling in a way that made something tight in Rio's chest loosen slightly. What else do you like to do? As Asher chattered about his friends and his favorite books, Rio studied Ivy's face. There was no calculation there, no hidden agenda, just genuine warmth and interest in his son's happiness. It was so foreign to his experience that he almost didn't recognize it. Miss Martinez, Rio said quietly, drawing her attention back to him. The way she looked up at him, still kneeling beside his son, did something dangerous to his carefully maintained control. You don't understand what you're offering. Ivy's chin lifted slightly, and Rio caught a glimpse of steel beneath her gentle exterior. I'm not offering to infiltrate your life, Mr. Vega. I'm offering to help a little boy feel normal for one morning. My world doesn't do normal, Rio said, his voice low enough that nearby tables couldn't overhear. And once you step into it, even for a day, there's no going back to pretending you don't know what you know. And what exactly would I know? Ivy asked, her brown eyes steady on his. Rio felt the familiar weight of his secrets, the constant calculation of what to reveal and what to hide. But looking at this woman who was willing to give his son something precious without asking for anything in return, he found himself wanting to be honest. That I'm not just a businessman, he said simply. That the reason Asher needs a bodyguard to go to school isn't because I'm paranoid. That the people who defer to me in this restaurant aren't just being polite. Understanding flickered in Ivy's eyes, but instead of fear, he saw something that looked like acceptance. And you're telling me this because my son is already attached to you, Rio said, glancing down at Asher, who was now showing Ivy a small toy car he'd pulled from his pocket. And because if you're going to be in his life, even for a day, you need to understand the risks. What kind of risks? Ivy asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to piece together the answer. The kind where people might try to hurt you to get to me, Rio said bluntly. The kind where your picture might end up in files you never wanted to be part of. The kind where saying yes to a 5-year-old's request might be the most dangerous thing you've ever done. Ivy was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm, but Rio was acutely aware of the eyes still watching their table, the whispered conversations that would spread through certain circles before the night was over. And if I say no, Ivy asked finally, then you go back to your life and Asher spends tomorrow morning with his nanny and we pretend this conversation never happened, Rio said. It would be the smart choice. But not the right choice, Ivy said, looking down at Asher, who was now arranging his toy cars in a line on the table. Maybe not, Rio admitted. Ivy stood slowly, smoothing down her skirt, and Rio found himself tracking the movement with more attention than was appropriate. When she met his eyes again, there was determination in her expression that reminded him of soldiers he'd known, people who'd made peace with dangerous choices. I'll do it, she said simply, but I have conditions. Rio's eyebrows rose. In his experience, people didn't make conditions with him. They made requests, carefully worded suggestions or desperate pleas, but never conditions. I'm listening, he said. First, I want to know exactly what I'm walking into. No surprises, no need-to-know basis. If I'm going to be responsible for Asher's safety even for a few hours, I need to understand the real risks. Rio nodded slowly. It was a reasonable request, and her concern for Asher's well-being rather than her own safety told him more about her character than hours of conversation might have. Second, Ivy continued, this doesn't make me part of your world permanently. After tomorrow, we go back to our normal relationship. You're a customer, I'm your waitress, and that's all. Agreed, Rio said, though something in his chest protested the idea of going back to careful distance after seeing her with his son. And third, Ivy said, her voice softer now, no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter how complicated things get, Asher comes first. Always. Rio studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden motive, but all he saw was fierce protectiveness, a woman who'd already decided to guard his son's heart as carefully as her own. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. When Ivy shook it, her palm was soft, but her grip was firm, and Rio felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with business negotiations and everything to do with the way she was looking at him, like she saw past the expensive suit and dangerous reputation to something worth trusting. "So what time should I be ready?" Ivy asked, releasing his hand. "I'll pick you up at 9, Rio said, pulling out his phone. "I'll need your address." Ivy hesitated for just a moment, and Rio understood why. Giving him her address was another line crossed, another step into his world. But then she rattled off the information, watching as he entered it into his phone without any visible reaction to the East LA zip code that screamed working-class struggle. "Daddy," Asher said, tugging on Rio's sleeve, "can we take Ivy for ice cream? To say thank you?" Rio looked at Ivy, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes despite her smile. "Another time, buddy. Ivy's been working all day." "But I want to show her my favorite flavor," Asher protested. "How about this?" Ivy said, kneeling down again to Asher's level. "After the breakfast tomorrow, you can tell me all about your favorite ice cream, and maybe we can get some together. Deal?" Asher's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Deal?" As they prepared to leave, Rio left his usual tip, but this time it was accompanied by a business card with only a phone number printed on it. "In case you change your mind," he said quietly, "or if you have questions before tomorrow." Ivy pocketed the card without looking at it. "I won't change my mind, even though you should. Especially because I should," Ivy said. And the small smile that accompanied her words made Rio's pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the dangerous territory his heart was entering. As they walked away, Asher's small hand in his father's larger one, Rio found himself looking back at Ivy one more time. She was watching them leave, her expression soft and thoughtful, and he realized that tomorrow was going to change more than just Asher's day. It was going to change everything. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Asher's exclusive private school, casting golden light across the decorated classroom where the Mother's Day breakfast was in full swing. Ivy sat at a tiny table beside Asher, helping him carefully glue glitter onto a construction paper card, while other families chatted around them. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple sundress in soft blue that was nice enough for the upscale school, but not so formal that she'd look like she was trying too hard. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup, wanting to look approachable for Asher's sake. Rio stood with the other fathers near the coffee station, and Ivy found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly throughout the morning. He'd traded his usual formal suits for dark jeans and a white button-down shirt that was casually unbuttoned at the collar, revealing more of the intricate tattoo that curved along his neck. The ink was beautiful, geometric patterns that seemed to tell a story she couldn't quite read. Even in casual clothes, he commanded attention, his presence making other men unconsciously step back and mothers steal appreciative glances. "What should I write in your card?" Asher asked, his small tongue poking out in concentration as he held a crayon. "Whatever feels right to you," Ivy said softly, watching as he carefully formed letters. Around them, other children were presenting their mothers with similar cards, and Ivy felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. This wasn't real. She was just playing a part for one morning. But watching Asher's serious concentration, seeing the joy on his face when other kids complimented his mom, made her heart ache with unexpected longing. "Done," Asher announced proudly, holding up his creation. The card was covered in glitter and crooked hearts with "To the best mom for a day," written in shaky kindergarten handwriting. But it was the message inside that made Ivy's breath catch. "Thank you for making me feel normal. I wish you could be my real mum. Love, Asher." Tears pricked at Ivy's eyes as she read it, and she had to blink rapidly to keep them from falling. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Thank you." "Why are you sad?" Asher asked, his dark eyes, so much like his father's, studying her face with the intense focus that children possessed. "I'm not sad," Ivy said, her voice slightly thick. "I'm happy. Sometimes people cry when they're really, really happy. Like when Daddy cries during movies but pretends he doesn't." Ivy glanced toward Rio, who was deep in conversation with another father, and smiled. Exactly like that. "Miss Martinez," a woman's voice interrupted their moment. Ivy looked up to see an elegantly dressed blonde approaching their table, her smile sharp and calculating. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, Tommy's mother. I don't think we've met." "Nice to meet you," Ivy said carefully, recognizing the tone of someone fishing for information. "How long have you and Rio been together?" Jennifer asked, settling into an empty chair without invitation. "It's just that we haven't seen you at any of the school functions before." Ivy felt heat rise in her cheeks. She hadn't prepared for this kind of interrogation. It's fairly recent." "How interesting," Jennifer said, her eyes taking in Ivy's simple dress and modest jewelry with obvious assessment. "And what do you do for work?" Before Ivy could answer, she felt a warm presence behind her. Rio had appeared at their table, his hand settling gently on her shoulder, in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Jennifer," Rio said, his voice carrying a subtle warning that made the other woman's smile falter. "How's your husband's new business venture? I heard there were some complications with the licensing." Jennifer's face went pale. We should probably get going. Tommy, gather your things." As she hurried away, Rio's hand squeezed Ivy's shoulder gently. "You okay? Do I have 'doesn't belong here' tattooed on my forehead?" Ivy asked quietly. "You belong wherever you choose to be," Rio said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Don't let people like her make you think otherwise." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. This wasn't just politeness. He genuinely believed what he was saying, and something about that made her pulse quicken. "Can we go to the playground now?" Asher asked, bouncing slightly in his chair. "I want to show Ivy the really tall slide." "Of course," Rio said, and Ivy noticed how his entire demeanor softened whenever he looked at his son. The playground was a wonderland of expensive equipment and manicured landscaping, with other families scattered across the grounds, enjoying the perfect Los Angeles morning. Asher ran ahead to claim a swing, calling for Ivy to push him. "Higher," he laughed, as she gave him gentle pushes. "I want to touch the clouds." "Be careful, buddy," Rio called from where he stood nearby, but his tone was indulgent rather than worried. "Daddy, come push too," Asher demanded. "Both of you together." Rio moved to stand beside Ivy, their shoulders brushing as they took turns pushing the swing. The casual contact sent electricity through her system, and she was acutely aware of his proximity, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way his shirt pulled across his broad shoulders, the glimpse of that mysterious tattoo whenever he moved. "Thank you," Rio said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "For today, for him. I know this isn't easy." "He's an amazing little boy," Ivy said, watching Asher's joyful face. "You should be proud." "I am, but I also know what he's missing, what I can't give him." There was pain in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. His mother. "Left when he was 6 months old," Rio said flatly. "Said she couldn't handle the uncertainty, the danger. She was probably right to be scared." "But she was wrong to leave him," Ivy said fiercely, unable to keep the anger out of her voice. "How do you abandon a baby?" Rio stopped pushing the swing and turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. Most people would say she made the smart choice, the safe choice. "Most people don't understand what it means to love someone unconditionally," Ivy said, then immediately wondered if she'd revealed too much. They were interrupted by Asher jumping off the swing and running toward them, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "That was so fun. Can we do it again?" "In a minute, buddy," Rio said, kneeling down to Asher's level. "But first, what do you say to Ivy for coming today?" Asher looked up at Ivy, his dark eyes serious and full of emotion that seemed too mature for his 5 years. Without warning, he stepped forward and reached up, his small hands framing her face as she automatically knelt down to his level. "Thank you for being my mum today," he whispered, his thumbs gently brushing across her cheekbones, where tears had started to fall without her realizing it. "You're the best pretend mom ever." The touch was so gentle, so innocent and loving, that Ivy felt her heart crack open completely. This beautiful little boy, who had every material thing he could want, but was missing the most basic need of all, a mother's love, was comforting her tears with the same tenderness she'd shown him. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking as she covered his small hands with her own. "You don't need to take care of me." "But you're crying," Asher said matter-of-factly, "and when people cry, you're supposed to make them feel better. That's what families do." Behind them, Rio stood frozen, watching his son's gentle gesture with an expression of raw vulnerability that transformed his entire face. The dangerous man who commanded fear and respect throughout Los Angeles was undone by a 5-year-old's simple act of kindness, and Ivy could see the exact moment when his carefully constructed walls began to crumble. "You're right," Ivy said softly, leaning forward to press a gentle kiss to Asher's forehead. "That's exactly what families do." As she straightened, still holding Asher's hands, her eyes met Rio's over his son's head. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. There was heat there, yes, but also something deeper. Something that looked dangerously like the beginning of love. "Ice cream now?" Asher asked hopefully, breaking the charged moment. "Ice cream now," Rio agreed, his voice rougher than usual. As they walked toward the parking lot, Asher between them holding both their hands, Ivy realized that somewhere between the card-making and the playground, between Jennifer Walsh's interrogation and Asher's gentle touch, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about helping a lonely child anymore. This was about 3 people who were all missing pieces of themselves and who might just be able to make each other whole. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The ice cream parlor in Santa Monica was exactly the kind of place Asher loved. Bright colors, dozens of flavors, and the kind of cheerful chaos that made children feel like anything was possible. But as Ivy watched Rio scan the exits and note the positions of other customers with practiced efficiency, she was reminded that their perfect morning existed in a bubble that could burst at any moment. "I want 3 scoops, Asher announced, pressing his face against the glass display case. "Chocolate, vanilla, and the one with the rainbow sprinkles." "2 scoops, Rio corrected gently, but his smile took any sting out of the words. "You'll make yourself sick." "But it's a special day," Asher protested, looking up at Ivy with hopeful eyes. "Right, Ivy. Special days mean extra ice cream." Ivy glanced at Rio, who shrugged with amused resignation. 2.5 scoops, she negotiated. "But you have to eat all your dinner tonight." "Deal," Asher said, bouncing on his toes with excitement. As they settled into a corner booth, Rio automatically choosing the seat that gave him the best view of the entrance, Ivy found herself studying the intricate tattoo that curved along his neck. Up close, she could see it was part of a larger design that disappeared beneath his collar, geometric patterns interwoven with what looked like Latin script. "It's beautiful," she said without thinking, then immediately felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your tattoo, I mean. Sorry, I didn't mean to stare." Rio's hand moved unconsciously to his neck, fingers tracing the visible ink. "Most people find it intimidating." "Most people probably don't see the artistry," Ivy said. "What does it mean?" For a moment, Rio was quiet, and Ivy thought he might not answer. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough that Asher, who was completely absorbed in his ice cream, couldn't hear. "It's a reminder," he said simply, "of choices made and prices paid." There was something in his tone that made Ivy want to reach across the table and touch his hand, to offer comfort for whatever pain those words carried. But before she could act on the impulse, Rio's phone buzzed against the table. His expression darkened as he read the message, and Ivy felt that familiar chill of fear that came whenever the outside world intruded on their bubble of normalcy. "Problem?" she asked quietly. "Always," Rio said, but his tone was resigned rather than worried. "Nothing that can't wait a few hours." "Daddy, look," Asher said, holding up his spoon, which was loaded with all 3 flavors. "I made a rainbow." "Very artistic, buddy," Rio said, his entire demeanor shifting back to warmth as he focused on his son. "But maybe eat it before it melts." As Asher giggled and took an enormous bite, getting ice cream on his nose in the process, Ivy felt her heart squeeze with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. This, sitting in a bright ice cream parlor, watching a father's face light up at his son's joy, feeling like part of something precious and real, this was what she'd been missing without even knowing it. "You're good at this," Rio said quietly, drawing her attention back to him. "At what?" "Being what he needs," Rio said, his dark eyes serious. "Making him feel normal, loved, safe. It's not as easy as you make it look." "It is easy," Ivy said honestly. "He's an incredible kid. How could anyone not love him?" Something flickered across Rio's face, pain, maybe, or old anger. His mother managed it. The bitterness in his voice made Ivy's chest tighten. That wasn't about him. That was about her fear. "Was it?" Rio asked. "Or was it about the reality of what loving us means?" Before Ivy could respond, Asher looked up from his ice cream with chocolate smeared across his cheek. "Are you and Daddy talking about my mommy who went away?" The innocent question hit like a physical blow, and Ivy saw Rio's jaw tighten as he struggled with how to answer. "We were just talking about how lucky your daddy is to have you," Ivy said gently, reaching over to wipe Asher's face with a napkin. "I'm lucky too," Asher said seriously. "I have the best daddy, and today I had the best pretend mommy. Maybe tomorrow I can have a real mommy." The hope in his voice was devastating, and Ivy felt tears prick at her eyes again. Over Asher's head, she met Rio's gaze and saw her own emotional turmoil reflected there. "Finish your ice cream, buddy," Rio said softly. "Then we'll head home." The drive back to Malibu was quieter, with Asher dozing in his car seat and classical music playing softly through the SUV's speakers. Ivy found herself studying Rio's profile as he drove, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel just a little too tightly. "You don't have to come in," Rio said as they pulled through the gates of his estate. "I can have Marcus drive you home." "Do you want me to leave?" Ivy asked. Rio was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "No," he said finally. "But wanting something and it being smart are two different things." "What if I don't care about smart?" Ivy asked. "What if I care about right?" Rio parked in the circular drive and turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Then you're more dangerous than I thought." Inside the house, Asher was a whirlwind of energy, despite his earlier nap, insisting on showing Ivy his room, his toys and his fish tank in exhaustive detail. But eventually, the excitement of the day caught up with him, and he crashed hard during story time, falling asleep in Ivy's lap as she read about dragons and brave knights. "He's out," Ivy whispered as Rio appeared in the doorway. "He had a good day," Rio said softly, moving to lift his son carefully from Ivy's arms. "The best day he's had in a long time." As Rio tucked Asher into his race car bed, Ivy stood in the doorway watching the tender ritual. The dangerous man who commanded fear throughout Los Angeles was infinitely gentle as he smoothed his son's hair and whispered goodnight, and the contrast made her heart ache with longing. "Come on," Rio said quietly, closing Asher's door behind him. "Let's talk." He led her to the terrace overlooking the Pacific, where the sun was beginning to set in brilliant oranges and pinks. 2 glasses of wine waited on the table, and Ivy settled into a chair while Rio remained standing, his hands braced on the railing as he stared out at the ocean. "I need to tell you something," he said without turning around. "About who I am, what I do, what being here with us really means." Ivy's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm listening." Rio turned to face her, and in the golden light of sunset, he looked like something out of a movie, beautiful and dangerous and completely compelling. "I run the largest criminal organization on the West Coast," and he said bluntly. "Import, export, money laundering, protection services, information brokerage. Nothing that directly hurts innocent people, but nothing that would look good in a courtroom either." The confession hung in the air between them, a test and a warning all at once. Ivy felt her breath catch, but not from fear. From the trust he was showing her by telling her the truth. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because after today, after watching you with my son, after seeing how perfectly you fit into our lives." Rio moved closer, his dark eyes intense. "I can't let you walk away without knowing exactly what you'd be walking into." "And what would I be walking into?" "Danger," Rio said without hesitation. Scrutiny. A life where every relationship is examined for weaknesses, where the people you care about become targets simply by association. A world where normal doesn't exist. Ivy stood, moving to face him fully. What if I don't want normal? Ivy? Rio's voice was rough with warning. What if I want this? She continued, stepping closer. What if I want him and you and whatever comes with it? You don't know what you're saying, don't I? Ivy reached up, her fingers tracing the edge of his tattoo where it curved along his neck. Rio's breath hitched at the contact, his eyes darkening. I've spent my whole life playing it safe, staying in my lane, not reaching for things that seemed too good to be true. But today felt real. It felt right. If you stay, Rio said, his voice barely above a whisper, if you become part of this, there's no going back, no changing your mind when things get complicated. I'm not going anywhere, Ivy said firmly. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Then, Rio's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones, in an echo of Asher's gentle touch earlier. You're going to turn my world upside down, he said softly. Good, Ivy breathed. Maybe it needs turning. When he kissed her, it was with a desperation that spoke of years of loneliness and the sudden, terrifying hope that maybe he didn't have to be alone anymore. Ivy melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rio rested his forehead against hers. Stay tonight, he whispered. Let me show you what you're signing up for. Ivy's answer was to kiss him again, pouring all her certainty and hope and reckless courage into the connection between them. Outside, the ocean waves crashed against the shore, and somewhere in the house a little boy slept peacefully, dreaming of the day his wish had finally come true. 3 weeks had passed since the Mother's Day breakfast, and Ivy's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She'd moved into Rio's guest house, a compromise that allowed her to be close to Asher, while they navigated the complexities of their new relationship. The adjustment hadn't been without challenges, but every morning that began with Asher's laughter and Rio's quiet strength reminded her that some risks were worth taking. This particular morning started like many others, with Asher appearing in her kitchen wearing pajamas and a serious expression, carefully measuring ingredients for what he called surprise pancakes. I'm making breakfast for you and Daddy, he announced proudly as Ivy appeared in her robe, hair still tousled from sleep. Because families make breakfast together. That's very thoughtful, sweetheart, Ivy said, wrapping him in a hug that smelled like vanilla and flour. Over his head, she met Rio's eyes where he stood leaning against the doorframe, dressed in jeans and an unbuttoned white shirt that revealed more of the intricate tattoo work that decorated his chest and neck. Careful with the spatula, buddy, Rio warned, as Asher wielded it with 5-year-old enthusiasm. Remember what we practiced. I know, Asher said importantly. Flip, don't fling. As they ate breakfast on the terrace, Asher chattering about his plans for the day, Ivy marveled at how natural this felt. How quickly they'd fallen into routines that felt like family, even though she knew the outside world saw something much more complicated. Miss Sarah wants to meet you properly, Asher told Ivy between bites of syrup-drenched pancakes. She said any mum who can make me this happy must be really special. Ivy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. They'd been careful about labels, about not confusing Asher's understanding of their relationship, but clearly he'd drawn his own conclusions. Asher, you know that Ivy and I are still figuring things out, right? Rio said gently. We don't want to rush into anything that might change later. But she lives here now, Asher said matter-of-factly. And she makes me lunch and reads me stories and helps me with my homework. That's what mums do. Before either adult could respond, Rio's phone buzzed with an urgency that immediately changed the atmosphere. His expression darkened as he read the message, and Ivy felt that familiar chill of fear. I have to go, Rio said, standing abruptly. Business that can't wait. Is everything okay? Ivy asked, trying to keep the worry out of her voice for Asher's sake. It will be, Rio said firmly, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand moved unconsciously to check something concealed beneath his shirt. He kissed the top of Asher's head, then leaned down to brush his lips against Ivy's. "Stay close to the house today. Marcus will be here if you need anything." After Rio left, Ivy tried to maintain normalcy for Asher's sake, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The feeling intensified when Marcus appeared at her door 2 hours later, his expression grim and professional. "Miss Martinez, we need to move you and the boy to the safe room now." "What's happening?" Ivy asked, even as she was already moving toward Asher's room. "Situation's developing," Marcus said tersely. "Boss's orders are to keep you both secure until he gets back." The safe room was hidden behind a bookshelf in Rio's study, a comfortable apartment complete with food, entertainment, and communication equipment. As Marcus sealed them inside, Ivy felt the weight of Rio's world settling around her like a heavy cloak. "Are we playing hide and seek?" Asher asked, looking around the room with curiosity rather than fear. "Something like that," Ivy said, settling beside him on the couch and pulling him close. "Want to watch a movie while we wait for Daddy?" The next few hours passed in a blur of animated films and forced normalcy, but Ivy couldn't stop imagining worst-case scenarios. When Rio finally returned, just after sunset, she threw herself into his arms before he'd even fully entered the room. "Are you hurt?" she asked, running her hands over his chest and arms, checking for injuries. She could feel the tension in his muscles, see the dangerous edge in his eyes that spoke of violence recently committed. "I'm fine," Rio said, holding her tight against him. "Everything's handled." "What happened?" Rio glanced at Asher, who was pretending to watch TV but clearly listening to every word. "Someone thought they could use my family to get to me. They were wrong." The word family sent a jolt through Ivy's system, not son and girlfriend or people I care about. Family. "Are the bad people gone?" Asher asked quietly, his young face serious with the kind of understanding that no 5-year-old should possess. "They're gone," Rio confirmed, his voice gentle but absolute, "and they won't be coming back." That night, after Asher was asleep, Rio and Ivy sat in his study, the weight of the day's events settling between them like a physical presence. "This is what I meant," Rio said quietly, his hands wrapped around a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. "This is the reality of being with me. Today you and Asher were targets simply because you matter to me." "But we're safe," Ivy pointed out. "Your people protected us. Your systems worked." "This time," Rio said, "but there will be other times, other threats. Can you live with that? Can you live with knowing that loving me puts you in danger?" Ivy was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the fear she'd felt today, the helplessness of not knowing if Rio was safe. Then she thought about Asher's face when he'd made them breakfast, about the way Rio looked at her like she was something precious, about the family they were building together. "Do you remember what Asher asked me that first night?" she said finally. "I remember. Can you be my mom for a day?" Ivy repeated softly. "I thought it was just for a day, just one morning of pretending, of giving a lonely little boy what he needed. But somewhere along the way it stopped being pretend." Rio's eyes searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. "Ivy, I love him," she said simply. "I love that little boy like he's my own. And I love you even though you're dangerous and complicated and probably going to give me grey hair before I'm 30. "You love me?" Rio asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you," Ivy confirmed, reaching up to trace the tattoo along his neck, feeling his pulse jump under her fingertips. "All of you. The father who would do anything for his son. The man who's gentle with me even when he's terrifying to everyone else. The person who's shown me that family isn't about blood or legality or perfect circumstances." Rio stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. Then we'll figure out the rest," Ivy said, "together. Even if it means giving up medical school, your old life." Ivy pulled back to look at him, seeing the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. "Who says I have to give up medical school? This family could use a doctor, don't you think? Someone to patch up stubborn men who think they're invincible?" Rio laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You want to be a mob doctor?" I want to be whatever this family needs me to be, Ivy said, starting with Asher's mom, if he'll have me. Are you sure? It's a big step, legally adopting him. It makes you part of this world permanently. I've been part of this world since the moment I said yes to a little boy's wish, Ivy said. Now I'm just making it official. Rio kissed her then, deep and desperate, and full of promises. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said suddenly. What? Marry me, Rio repeated, his hands framing her face with the same gentle reverence Asher had shown that first day. Not because it's practical or safe or makes sense, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it, because you've given me and Asher something I didn't even know we were missing. Is that a proposal or a command? Ivy asked, her heart racing. It's a plea, Rio said softly. From a man who never thought he'd find someone brave enough to love his son, his world, his heart. Yes, Ivy whispered, reaching up to trace his lips with her fingertips. Yes, to all of it. The marriage, the adoption, the crazy, dangerous, beautiful life we're going to build together. When they told Asher the next morning, his reaction was everything they could have hoped for, and more. So Ivy's going to be my real mom now? He asked, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked between them. If you want her to be, Rio said. Asher launched himself into Ivy's arms with such force that they both tumbled backward onto the couch, laughing. I wished for this, he said seriously, his small hands cupping her face in an echo of that first magical touch. I wished for a mom who would stay forever and ever. Forever and ever, Ivy promised, holding him close while Rio watched with an expression of pure contentment. That's exactly how long I'm planning to stay. As Asher peppered them with excited questions about weddings and whether he could help pick out rings, Ivy caught Rio's eye over their son's head. The dangerous man who commanded fear throughout Los Angeles was smiling with the kind of joy she'd never seen before, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was open your heart, and sometimes it was the only thing worth doing. Years had passed since a little boy's simple question had changed 3 lives forever. The Malibu house was fuller now, echoing with the sounds of family, Asher's laughter as he chased his little sister Sophia through the halls, the gentle splash of swimming lessons in the pool, the quiet conversations between parents who had found their way to each other through courage and love. Doctor, Ivy Vega stood in the doorway of her home office, watching through the window as Rio taught 8-year-old Asher and 3-year-old Sophia how to tend the garden they'd planted together. Her medical degree hung on the wall behind her, earned through night classes and weekend studies, supported by a husband who understood that dreams didn't have to die just because life took unexpected turns. Mama? Sophia called, running toward the house with dirt-covered hands and Rio's dark eyes. Look what we grew. She held up a small tomato, pride radiating from her tiny face. Behind her, Asher grinned, gap-toothed, and confident in the way of children who had never doubted they were loved. It's perfect, sweetheart, Ivy said, scooping Sophia into her arms despite the dirt. Rio approached, pulling Asher close with one arm while the other wrapped around Ivy's waist. The tattoo on his neck had been joined by others over the years, Sophia's name in delicate script, their wedding date in Roman numerals, symbols of the family they'd built from a moment of pure faith. What do you think, Dr. Vega? He asked, his voice warm with contentment, ready for another family dinner on the terrace. Ivy looked at her husband, at the children who called her Mama, at the life they'd built from a moment when a little boy had reached up to touch her face with gentle fingers. I think, she said, this is exactly what I wished for. Even though I never asked properly, Asher said with a grin, now old enough to understand the magnitude of that first brave question. Especially because you asked, Ivy replied, kissing the top of his head. The best families start with the bravest questions. As the sun set over the Pacific, the Vega family headed inside together, carrying with them the tomatoes they'd grown and the love they'd chosen day after day, to nurture into something beautiful and lasting.